Hey, hello. This is Nyan Maria speaking, and today I want to talk to you about the wild animals we might encounter on the trails when we go hiking. When we hit the trail, we're bound to run into wild animals. We might not even realize it, and it's a good thing that not every predator wants to eat us. But still, I believe that absolutely any wild animal can potentially be harmful to your health. Basically, it's clear what kind of danger large predatory animals can pose to humans. Simply put, they see humans as their prey. That's actually the reason why they might attack people. Well, for example, here in Siberia, absolutely everyone who goes on even the smallest hike into the mountains or out of town is interested in whether there are bears in that area, on those trails. And the answer, unfortunately or fortunately, I'm not sure, but the answer is always yes. Bears are absolutely everywhere around Lake Baikal, and this can cause some difficulties, let's say, for tourists. You always have to stay alert. It's less common to encounter a fox or a wolf. Personally, I've only heard stories from my hitchhiker friends who were followed by packs of wolves or foxes specifically on the highways between cities. But as for encountering canines somewhere on a trail, far from civilization, I don't know of any such cases. It's important to understand that wolves don't attack adult humans. At least, there hasn't been a single recorded case of wolves attacking adults, which unfortunately can't be said about our children. Wolves often perceive young children as potential prey simply because of their significantly smaller physical size and stature compared to adult humans. Lynx and wolverines are encountered even less often than canines. At the same time, it's important to understand that you won't find them on tourist trails at all. They live far away, in mountainous areas, so it's more likely that forest rangers or hunters will encounter them, people who spend long periods in the taiga, living for weeks or even months in cabins or winter lodges, staying out there for extended times. But as for meeting a tiger or a snow leopard, that's extremely difficult, simply because both are listed in the Red Book and they themselves prefer to avoid people. And again, they live far beyond the bounds of civilization, well beyond, in fact, any tourist trails. So, I think there's no need to be afraid of running into a tiger, even if you're heading out on a multi-day hike. So, what kind of trouble can you expect from large predators? Well, first and foremost, of course, predators see us as potential prey and, in fact, may attack a person specifically to eat them. There's just no getting around that. That's the way nature is. Predators can also damage a person's shelter and their supplies. Since we're talking about multi-day hikes here, we immediately picture a person going out with a tent and a limited amount of food, heading out onto a trail or into the mountains. And, in fact, it often happens that bears can simply be attracted by the smell of food or the scent of a person, break into and tear apart a tent, and basically start taking food from the person. And really, the person has no choice but to just leave everything behind and head back. Because in the taiga, without even the most basic camping gear, it would be very difficult for a person to continue their journey. That's why people return to civilization, and in this way, the predator still ends up causing harm to the person. It's important to remember that predators can also be carriers of infectious diseases. The most striking example here is canines, meaning wolves and foxes. They can carry and transmit a disease like rabies. Unfortunately, it leads to a 100% fatal outcome, both for the animal and, God forbid, for a person who contracts this disease. That's why you need to be very careful here, and under no circumstances should you have any contact with a wild animal. Especially stay away from animals where it's clear they have this infectious disease. Let's move on to the next group of animals. These are large animals that are not predators. For example, these include camels, moose, deer, and yaks. They can harm a person either accidentally because of their size or intentionally. But there has to be a very specific reason for that. This happens during their mating season. But for the most part, of course, when these animals encounter humans, they simply get scared and leave or run away. In other words, they do everything they can to get away from people on their own. The next category of animals is small rodents. They can pose a danger to humans even without direct contact with us. What am I talking about? The most common infectious disease is mouse fever. It is transmitted through the feces, urine, and saliva of small rodents. In everyday language, this disease is called mishka, the mouse. And honestly, there's nothing pleasant to expect from this disease, unfortunately. This disease is quite severe for humans. The temperature starts to rise, you get chills, your vision deteriorates significantly, vomiting and nausea appear. Now, it's unlikely that you'll die from mouse fever, of course, but unfortunately, the complications for a person's health can be very serious and irreversible. We've talked about bears, wolves, moose, deer, and mice. Now it's time to talk about insects. We can encounter insects even within city limits. Insects are tricky, and while the harm from some flies, gnats, bumblebees, or mosquitoes isn't really that noticeable for human health. But when it comes to ticks, you really need to take this seriously, especially if you're heading out somewhere away from civilization, out of town, like if you're going on a hike, and especially if it's a multi-day trip. Be sure to bring tools for removing ticks. Hopefully you won't need it, but still, remember the basic safety measures. Tuck your clothes into your gloves and pants, and constantly check each other for ticks. In general, staying alert is really important. And the last wild animal you might encounter when going on a hike is, of course, snakes. In Russia, poisonous snakes are mostly common, specifically venomous vipers. Some of them are less venomous, some are more dangerous. In any case, it's best not to mess around with snakes, especially if you don't know much about their different types. Let's put it that way. You should remember that they mostly live near rivers, around swamps, and sometimes nest in rotting trees. So, in any case, you need to be careful and cautious, including to protect your life and your health. But I think it wouldn't be pleasant at all to get bitten by a snake, especially a venomous one, when you're just going out for a trip. That's where I'll wrap up my video. Be sure to write in the comments about what animals you've encountered on your hikes. Subscribe to the channel, give it a like, and stay safe. See you all next time.